Welcome to the channel, everyone. If you're new to camping or overlanding, it can feel really overwhelming to try and plan your first trip. In this video, I'm going to share some tips for finding cool destinations. I'll let you know what apps and websites I use to plan and navigate during my trips, as well as do a quick trip planning walkthrough to show you my process for planning a trip. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to cover is that if you're using an EV for road trips, camping trips, overlanding adventures, it definitely requires a little more planning than if you had a traditional gas-powered vehicle. I've taken quite a few trips with my Rivian so far, and I've been really impressed with how easy it's been to get out into the wilderness and not really worry about range anxiety if you plan properly. No doubt there are some areas that are just not accessible by electric vehicle at this point in time, but the infrastructure is definitely expanding, and there are many places currently that you can go visit with your EV that are really amazing. With that being said, let's get into the next topic. How do you find a destination for your next adventure? So a really good starting point is just to open up Google Maps and look for national parks and national forests. You can see what's in your area. They're all marked on Google Maps very clearly, and there are a lot of locations, some that you've probably heard of and some that maybe you haven't heard of. But this is a really good starting point to find interesting locations to plan a trip around. The next resource to check out is BLM Land, or Bureau of Land Management. So this is basically public land that's managed by the Department of Interior, and they've got a website with an interactive map. I will say on the east side of the US, there's definitely not a lot of these BLM spaces. But as you make your way to the west, you can see anything that's marked in yellow here is BLM land. There are a lot of areas that are designated as BLM. Now, what's so special about these spaces? Well, if you go on the BLM website, you'll see that camping is one of the opportunities on public land. Now, there are developed campgrounds in some areas, but there's also dispersed camping, and most of the remainder of public lands are open to dispersed camping. So generally, these spaces are a great opportunity to find campgrounds and camping spaces in the wilderness that are less crowded than you would find at your typical national park. Another cool opportunity with these public lands is you'll have lots of OHV spaces in certain places, and those are areas where you can go off-roading. And then the last few resources, you're on one of them right now, which is YouTube. You've got Instagram and just basic Google search. But what I would recommend is when you see something interesting on any of these channels, write it down in your notes, pin it on a map. The more you can keep track of things that catch your eye, the easier it will be when it comes time to plan a trip to find locations that you want to visit. All right, for the next topic, I'm going to share the apps and websites I use most for finding destinations, planning my trips, and navigating while I'm out on adventures. There are 5 main resources that I use, and those are Google Maps, PlugShare, OnX Off-Road, Gaia GPS, and AllTrails. And all 5 of these have apps you can use on your phone as well as websites. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these right now. So the first one here is Google Maps. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, as I'm sure you've probably used it before, but it's my basic navigation resource. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's really easy to see where national parks and national forests are located just by looking at Google Maps. The next one is PlugShare. And this is a resource that I've been using a lot to plan my trips and also while I'm out on trips. And it's basically a way to find good charging stations. So there's a lot of filters you can select here based on what type of plug you need for your vehicle. You can set the minimum power you're looking for from the charging station, so this determines obviously how quickly you're going to be able to charge. The best part about PlugShare is this plug score rating. So this is a rating system for charging stations based on people who are actually using the charging stations. I normally leave this at a 7 or above, and generally that gets me to charging stations that are working properly, are charging at the speeds they're supposed to, and it's just a really helpful resource to be able to set this rating and know that the charging station I'm going to is actually working properly. So right now on this map, it's displaying only charging stations that have a 7 or above rating. So just clicked on this charging station. It's got a rating of 10, which is awesome. And you'll see that as a user, you can leave a check-in and a review. So it's very easy to click on a charging station and make sure that people are having a good experience with the charger, and just lets me know that when I end up at a charging station, it's going to work as it's supposed to. So this is a really great resource to use. So next is Gaia GPS. Gaia is really a great tool. There's a lot of information and features in Gaia, but I'm just going to quickly go through some of the important features and things that I use. So the first one is you have the ability to tag waypoints, and every time I see something interesting or something that I want to visit, I will tag it in Gaia, and it just gives me a running list of things that I've either seen or want to see. This is a great way to keep track of these things. So that's the first thing that I use quite a bit. Also, the map layers are really impressive. There's a ton of different options for maps and map layers. They've got different categories depending on what activity you're doing. Even for different countries, there's maps and options there. So you can really customize what you're seeing on your map, everything from basic overlanding maps to precipitation, to cell coverage, snow depth. There's a lot of information, as I said, that you can gather from Gaia. This folder just stores all of your waypoints and stored locations and routes. And then you can obviously add waypoints, create routes as you're on the web browser, and you can also do that on your phone. So there's obviously a lot of information and a lot of features in Gaia. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details today, maybe in a separate video, but this is a great app and website to use for marking waypoints, planning out your trips, and I'll show you in just a minute here how I've roughly planned out a trip and how useful this tool can be. Next, we have OnX Maps, or OnX Off-Road is the name of the app. And I use this primarily for finding off-road trails. So they have a very simple way to do that, just clicking Discover, and it's going to show you what off-road trails are near you. When you click on a trail, it zooms in on the location. It gives you a difficulty rating and a technical rating. It'll show you what it's accessible by. You can even add your own vehicles in here. And then it'll give you a description of the trail and some pictures as well. So there's a good amount of information on these off-road trails, and it's just a really easy, simple way to find interesting off-road trails in the area you're in. Now, similar to Gaia, you can also mark waypoints. You can also create routes. I don't use those features as much in OnX Off-Road, but you can definitely do that. I have marked some locations, and that will show up in your content over here. Another great feature is you can create offline maps, and you'll see these green boxes here. So basically these are areas where I've downloaded the maps, and I'll do this when I'm on my phone. So again, if I'm in an area where I don't have cell service, I'll be able to fully access the maps without needing cell signal. You can also create a garage, add your vehicles in, and that'll help you filter by what trails are going to show up in the Discover New Trails section. There are a few options for map layers, definitely not as in-depth as Gaia, but you've got a few things you can set here between satellite, hybrid, and topo. and they have a pretty good 3D map as well. I think it's actually a little bit better than Gaia because you can really amp up the 3D aspect of it, and it can be very interesting to see how a trail tracks up into the mountains and get an idea of the elevation that you're going to be encountering when you're out on a trail. So I'll switch back here to the 2D map. You also get weather conditions and wind similar to Gaia. It's just roughly based on the location that you're zoomed in on, but that is another feature of onX Off-Road. And as I zoom out here, you're gonna see that there are massive amounts of trails that have been uploaded into onX Off-Road. So it's really easy to find some trails in areas you're going to be in. All right, and lastly, we've got all trails. Now, again, I primarily use this for finding hiking trails, but there are off-road trails listed on here as well. And sometimes the most up-to-date information is actually on all trails. So the trail I took on my previous off-road video is on here. And if you click on this, you actually get some good information from people's comments. A lot of times the trail conditions or even trail closures are most up to date on all trails. So again, this is a really good way to get information on trails, not just for hiking, but also for off-roading. You can also go up to the tab for activity and click on OHV or off-road driving, and it'll just filter and show you off-road trails in the area you're viewing. So this is another great way to find trails to explore. All right, so those are the 5 main resources that I'm using to plan trips, pin interesting locations, and find new spots to check out. Also, I'm giving you a lot of digital tools to help you in your trip planning and navigating. But if you're interested in figuring out what kind of gear you actually need to take with you on these trips, check out this video on my channel that walks you through everything you'll need for a camping or overlanding adventure. So next I want to show you really quickly how I put all of these resources together to plan a trip. So starting on Google Maps, I've been to a few of the locations near where I live, like Joshua Tree, San Bernardino National Forest. The Mojave National Preserve caught my eye, and I started doing a little bit of research and realized this is a really, really cool spot, and it's not as popular as some of these other locations. So the first quick step was to check out PlugShare and see if there were any good chargers near Mojave National Preserve. And it turns out there are a couple to the south and a couple to the north. So that lets me know that I can charge right near the park and spend a few days in the Mojave National Preserve and not have to worry about charge. Next, I did a little searching on onX Maps as well as all trails. There's some cool hikes in the Mojave National Preserve, and there's also some pretty interesting off-roading in this area as well. So once I knew that charging wasn't going to be an issue, there were some interesting places to check out. I quickly planned this route out on Gaia using the same steps that I showed you earlier in the video. I marked my first charging stop here based on this PlugShare location in Baker, and then made myself a route that backtracks down the highway and then hops on this off-road trail, and marked a point of interest that I had found that looked really cool, set the rest of the trail and another point of interest for the first day, and then set a camp spot for my first night. And this was based off of just searching for dispersed camping in the Mojave National Park. You'll see Gaia actually has some of these dispersed campsites marked on this map, which was really useful. From there, I planned the route for the second day down to the southern part of the park to the Kelso Dunes, which was another location that I had found that looked really cool, and found another campsite right near that area. So I've got that marked here on Gaia. And then for the following day, another off-road trail in between these two main roads, and a hike that I had found on all trails. And from there, exiting the park to the south, and another one of those charging stations that I found on PlugShare. So I've got myself a rough trip itinerary here. I don't always follow these exactly, but it gives me a good idea of places that I want to go, make sure I don't miss anything. And I can also click on this route now that I've got it planned. It lets me know how many miles I'll be covering. So 132 miles between charging is no big deal at all. So that also lets me know I've got plenty of time to explore. I could maybe go do a couple other trails and not have any issues. And this gives me a quick picture of what a trip could be like to the Mojave National Preserve. So the last thing I want to cover in this video are just a few important things to remember as you plan your next trip. The first one I mentioned a little bit earlier in this video, but check the cell service in the areas you're going to be in. And if there's no service, make sure you download the maps before you get there or bring a traditional map with you. Next, make sure you take a look at the fire restrictions in your area. There are a lot of places where certain times of year you can't have a fire, and unfortunately, just because you're at a campground doesn't necessarily mean you can have a campfire. The next one I also mentioned a little earlier in this video, but check the weather and wind conditions for where you're going. And there's one more that got me on my trip to Yosemite. Check the air quality. If you're in an area where there are potential wildfires, air quality can be an issue. So that's something to check as well. Another important one, please clean up after yourself and pack out your trash. Let's leave these spaces as beautiful as we can. All right, and the last thing, this one's really important. Make sure you're having fun out there. Thanks for watching, everyone. If there's any other apps or resources that I missed, drop a comment below. If you found this video useful, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of awesome content coming your way. Stay tuned.